I could not wait to get started on this project. We are going to be doing today string piecing. We get to go through all of our pretty scrap fabrics and cut them into strips. I love doing mini strips, and so I'm gonna cut these into 1-inch strips. You can do 1.5 strips if you'd like. Completely up to you. This project is going to have 2 parts to it. Today we're going to assemble just the top, and we're gonna make this into a hot pad. The second part of the video will be quilting it onto the Warm Up Natural, and then also adding a binding to it and just completing the hot pad. But today we're just going to do the top. What I use to stabilize it, because you most likely are gonna be cutting on a bias and it's gonna stretch out your fabrics, I'm just going to use tissue paper today. I've tried in the past to use the paper piecing, but I have found it's just too thick, and then you're spending a lot of time trying to pick it off of the back. With this tissue paper, it is a lot easier to take off, but even if you don't take the time to rip it off, it still is not going to give you a lot of bulk. So of course you're going to need a whole bunch of scrap fabric, some tissue paper, and we are going to cut these. This example, these are 4-inch squares. So we're going to cut the tissue paper into 4-inch squares. Now I want to make 2 hot pads. That means I'm going to cut 8 squares. So I just did this one, and then I'm going to do one more with you. So another thing that you're going to want to think about is you can do where it looks like a square and then everything else is scrappy. So I did white. Therefore, I'm going to have white be the starter on all of my squares. And then from there, I'll go with a scrappy. So you can put this scrappy over it and then sew it, and then it'll be like this. So decide what you want this one to be. And then we'll go ahead and cut our strips. Okay, here are your 4-inch squares. To make it easier, you can draw a line to use as a guide. We'll mark 1/2 inch from the corner of the square. I'm placing my first strip right side up, my second strip right side down, and I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And just repeat that with all 4 squares. You can see right here how I have positioned the strips exactly in the middle of the square. We did this same technique in the last video that I did, so you can refer back to that one if you need to see more of the details. And then I just finger press after each strip is sewn on. Keep adding more strips until your square is covered with fabric. Now we will just trim them. Remember, they're going to be 4-inch blocks. Now just place them together and just switch them around if you like so that you get what you want, and we're going to sew them together. Make sure the blocks are going in the right direction so that it makes the square, and then flip them over, and we're going to sew them together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I know there are so many different types of stabilizers out there. There's even some that dissolve in water. Leave a comment if you found one that you really like. When you sew the remaining 2 blocks together, make sure that your fabrics are still making that square formation. See? Now you're going to immediately want to stitch all around the block to make sure that your strips stay in place. I just stitch it less than 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and you're going to want to make sure that you do this because when you start tearing off the tissue paper, you don't want the shape to stretch out. Now we are ready to take off the tissue paper. So I'm using this. I don't know if I would recommend that. You might pierce into the fabric. This is the part that I hate. It's kind of time consuming. If you used white tissue paper, it's not that important to get it all off, but me, I actually used green tissue paper and the color is going to bleed into the fabric if you get it wet. And the reason why I used green tissue paper is so that you could see it better in the video. I wasn't even thinking about the color, I was only thinking of my viewers. And now here we are. And if you're still watching, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. So remember, this is a 2-part series, so when we meet back here for the next video, you will have some warm and natural, and then you can also pick up some insul-bright to put in the hot pad, as well as some fabric for the back and fabric for the binding. And I will include all of that information in the descriptions below. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any other videos. Happy sewing!